Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amara Obiago. I am one of the WAB of 31 co-chairs. Thank you so much for being here. It makes my heart overflow with joy just seeing a full room. So thank you so much. So our next speaker really needs no introduction because when he walked in, he got almost a standing ovation. But, you know, protocol. So I will introduce the speaker. Mr. Obi is a Nigerian politician, businessman, and former governor of Anambra State. He has a background in business, holding various leadership roles in banking and commerce before transitioning into politics. Mr. Obi earned degrees from prestigious institutions, including the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and has undergone executive programs at Harvard Business School, INSEAD, and London School of Economics. Mr. Obi's political career took off in 2006 when he was elected governor of Anambra State, serving 2 terms up until 2014. During his tenure, he focused on fiscal responsibility, education, and infrastructure, leaving the state with significant financial reserves. His governance was widely praised for prioritizing the welfare of the people and reducing state debt. In the 2019 Nigerian general elections, Mr. Obi was the vice presidential candidate for the People's Democratic Party, PDP, running alongside Mr. Atiku Abubakar. In 2019, he became the presidential candidate for the Labour Party, gaining significant support for his anti-corruption stance, economic prudence, and advocacy for good governance. Mr. Obi's political approach emphasizes transparency, youth empowerment, and restructuring Nigeria's economy to foster growth and development. His influence still resonates and continues to resonate within Nigeria's political landscape. Please join me to welcome Mr. Obi to the stage.
So where do I
go? Thank you so much for coming all the way to Philadelphia.
Thank you.
Yeah? Well, we've already been chatting today, so I'm going to drive straight into it because you said I shouldn't shy away from the hard questions.
Yes.
All right. So you have said, because I've been listening, that the most important lesson for a leader is to listen and learn. So we're curious to know, what are you listening to right now and what are you learning?
Interesting. Well, I think I remain on that trajectory. A leader must learn from those he's serving, those working for him, and understand the need of the society. What am I learning now? Quite frankly, I've been traveling globally, learning from different leaders who have served, those who are serving, and learning from people like you. Because at the end of the day, it is about you. You can't lead without knowing what the people want. Because you're not doing it for yourself. So you must listen to them. I gave an example yesterday of how I was able to clear pension and gratuity when I was governor. I used to go to church in the morning, every day. And I was in a church, and an 80-year-old woman came in and said I should leave the church. And everybody was like, oh, maybe something is wrong with this woman. I said, no, let me listen to her. She says she's being owed gratuity and pension, and God will not listen to my prayers unless she's paid. So I followed her to her house. And after that, I decided I must clear this debt. And you must have heard my famous language about how I stopped crime in a place in Anambra State. There's a place we call Piweka. You know, we have pickpockets there and everything. And I went there as the governor. And there was a madman there. He kept insisting he would talk to me. And as everybody said, but the man is mad. I said, let's listen to him. And he told me, he said, the people who come to steal comes from here. See these barracks? You either remove this military barracks from here, or they will stop. Because they go in their house. He was a madman. But he stays there every day. So he has a local knowledge of what is happening there without the people knowing, because they took him that, okay, it's not part of their problem, it's not of their, but he observes what is happening there. So a leader must listen to people. You must learn always. If you stop learning and listening, you shouldn't lead. You're dangerous.
That's a very good point. Listening. Listening to what's around, but also listening to yourself. Something we spend a lot of time at Wharton developing, specifically in the NVA program, is focusing on mission and calling, and really understanding and transitioning from a career-focused life to kind of listening to yourself and going for a mission-focused life. So I'm curious to hear for you, what is your mission and what is your calling, and how did it come about?
Well, that's a tough one. Well, if I look at my past, if you look at a bit of my past, I was born in a business family, a trader, basically. If you live in a town where I live on a child, the only thing you do there is trading. Mm-hmm. My father was a trader, my mother was a trader. So the only thing I knew about is trading. They insisted I must go to school, but I was more interested in what they were doing. So I grew up, of course, became a trader, got involved in business, like every other young person that grew up in Onitsha. But as I get on in life, I find that there's more in terms of giving back to the society and contributing in building a better society. Even when, of course, you're trying to make money, but there's more in trying to support a better society, in doing things that works for everybody. And of course, as I get on in life, I happened to do a program here in the United States in 2001 that changed that trajectory from my being focused on business, banking, and everything to public life. Because I found that there's need for us to, just like I was telling you, that all these folks here should come and take over Africa. Yeah. You know, because that Africa needs their talent and their energy. I found out that I can do better than those who were serving at that time. And I got involved in politics. And my politics today, just take it as a, I'm still trying to mobilize the young, dynamic people who have all it takes to build a better country, especially in Nigeria.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to maybe make it still a little bit tougher. There's a story from 2001 where you're with your professor along the lake, and I would love for you to share the story with the audience.
You know, in my business life and living a life as a young man, I started wondering, you know, I lived in the UK for 10 years. And I see things going well in the UK and things not going well in Nigeria. Out of curiosity, I said, maybe I wasn't as lucky as Ibrahim. Maybe these people have something, or maybe there's something in these people that is not in those of us in Nigeria. So I decided I'm going to go to most business school. You just read a few of them today. I went to London School of Economics, Harvard, Columbia, Kellogg, Oxford, Cambridge, INSEAD.
Everything but Wharton, apparently.
You know, If people ask me, said, you are an alumnus of Oxford, Cambridge, what? I said, I was just looking, maybe there must be something that, and I went to all these schools, I didn't. But in 2001, I was in Kellogg. Everybody who has been to Kellogg knows that they have a famous dean of graduate school called Professor Donald Jacob. Yeah. It was almost like he's the founder. So in 2001, I had a 3-month course seminar. He took us on what he called the world economy. For 3 months, he never mentioned anything about Africa. Not one day. So a day before the last day, and the last day of that lecture is going to retire. He's been there for 57 years. A day before the end of it, I raised my hand. And I said, Dean Jacob, you have not said anything about Africa. He said, Peter, do you want to know about Africa? I said, yes. I paid $40,000 for this. And you have not spoken about my continent. So what am I doing here? He said, tomorrow I'll tell you about Africa. So the next day, he finished and looked at me and said, do you want to know about Africa? I said, yes. He said, there's nothing called African economy.
Controversial.
I said, have I seen a vehicle called African spec? Now we have American spec, Gulf spec, Asian spec, European spec. Have I ever seen African spec? I said, no. He said, in your country, do you have 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plan? I said, maybe, I think so. I haven't seen one, but I believe there will be somewhere. But I told him, I said, I think so. He said, join me for lunch. So I joined Donald Jacob for lunch. If you know Kellogg very well, it's on bank of Lake Michigan. So after having lunch, we had lunch, he said, let's take a walk by the lake. As we were taking a walk, he asked me, do you have any of your country's currency? I said, yes. That time, the biggest denomination in Nigeria was 100 naira. So I brought 100 naira out. And he brought $100. And he said to me, which of these two currencies do you prefer? And I said, the dollar. He said, why? I said, because it's 100 to 1. 100 naira to $1. So he asked me to keep the dollar. So I kept the dollar. So I've got $10,000 as against 100 naira. So I kept his dollars, and we walked like another about 100 kilometers again. And he said, Peter, he stopped again and said, I should bring out the $100. Of course, I was imagining, because I've already assumed I've gained this money. I hope he's not going to take it back. And I brought it out again, hesitantly, that I don't want to lose it, because for me, it's already home. So I brought it out again. He brought out my 100 naira, and he said to me, Peter, which of these two currencies do you prefer? And again I said, $100. Why? I gave him the same answer. He said, let's sit down. There was like a bench by the lake. He said, let's sit down there. So we sat down, and he looked at me and said, Peter, let me tell you, young man, the only reason why you prefer another country's currency to your currency is the amount of faith you have in your country. You don't have faith in your country. Economy is driven by faith. And you can only have faith in your country if there's a hope. I have taught in this school for 50-something years. There's no country that doesn't have a problem. Chinese people keep their money in Chinese yuan. Singapore in Singaporean dollar. Malaysians in ringgits. And he went around. Then there was no euro. Said Italians in Italian lira. Germans in
Marks.
dogs. German is in UK in pounds. Nobody wants to keep his money. But because you don't have faith in your country, you prefer another country's currency, making it stronger and better. Can I ask you for a favor? I've been interacting with you for the past 3 months. You've always been asking one question or the other. Because there's no day I come to class, I was ready to cover the money I paid. So I make sure I ask questions because I don't want to go back and miss anything.
Get all the tuition work.
Yes, I want to know. So I said, he said, you've always asked questions, you've always wanted to know. But today, can I ask you for a favor? I said, okay. He said, go back to your country and participate in building public wealth. Public wealth enriches everybody. Individual wealth impoverishes everybody. You should serve in the public space. That's where you belong. I know you're chairman of a bank, you're this. So if I tell you what I'm saying now, it will be difficult for you. But you've told me you've reached certain, you've done well for yourself. You can afford to pay for your food. Just go and serve. And that was the last time we spoke, until I met him after being governor.
Oh, wow.
Because I had to come and report to him what happened to me.
Gave him a status update.
Anyway, I went back and something happened. Everybody that knew my state or knew what happened in my state then know that schools were closed for 2 years. Children didn't go to school. So I went back with that at the back of my mind. I arrived at my house one day and said to my wife, I'm going to be governor of my state. And it was like Steve Jobs asking John Scully to come and stop selling sugared water. She was like, where are you coming from? You have not voted. You don't have anything. Where are you going? What are you talking? I said, I'm going to be governor of my state. I want to go home and campaign to be governor. I can't continue doing this when the system is collapsing. These children are not in school for 2 years. So I decided to get involved. That's the beginning of my politics. That's why I said until it was changed from that day. So that was my experience. And probably that's what I'm inviting most of you to go and do.
Thank you so much for that. I heard that story and I thought it was appropriate to share it with the people in this room. They're absolutely all about Africa now and definitely about the next. So we're going to open it up to some Q&A so you can hear directly from them. If you have a question, please, okay, in the front. You're the first, so now you have to stand up and introduce yourself and... You want to stand up? Yeah. You can stand up, yeah. Yeah. He's all about audience interaction, so he wants to stand up.
Okay.
Please do.
Thank you so much, sir, for coming all the way here to speak to us. My name is Sasan Dorsey. I'm Shakiri from a tiny tribe in Nigeria. I lived in Lagos for 2 years, and when I had just moved to Nigeria to build a startup, a month after I moved, I was 23, the NSARS protests happened, and my mom was like, you need to come back, come back to America. I think I hear stories from my parents and people in my parents' generation about, the power that youth used to have in Nigeria, with holding politicians accountable. Youth groups, university students used to protest Do you believe in civil disobedience, and do you think that the young people in Nigeria need to harness the power of civil disobedience to keep politicians accountable? And at what point do we need to be a bit more radical in our approach with keeping politicians more accountable? Because, you know, right now the politicians do not fear the people. So that is my question to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let me first tell you, I won't use the word civil disobedience. It's actually, call it civil obedience. Because you're trying to ask the proper or put them in there. Often a time, leaders, especially in Africa, you know, if you look at what has happened in Africa now, is that this leadership failure over the years don't do what is expected. They do what is expected or what they are pushed to do. And there's nothing wrong with it. I have been a leader myself, and I've been corrected, just like I mentioned now by somebody reminding me to pay pensioners and everything. One of the worst things that is happening in Nigeria, let me use Nigeria for example, to us as leaders, that nobody says no to us. If you're a governor in Nigeria, which I've been, people celebrate you to point of stupidity. Because you come to a place, somebody is telling you, oh, since you became governor, everything has changed. And you're looking, nothing has changed. You know? And they give you some award. They call you of name. Like you will see, His Excellency. You know, you've been in school. When you talk about excellent, is after fair, good, very good, best, excellent. So His Excellency means a life we can emulate. But you see somebody who is not even fair. They're calling him His Excellency. And they're telling, since you came, things has changed. And you know nothing has changed. So it's good that you question it. Is it right? I went to a school, a secondary school. Somebody just mentioned when I came in here today.
We were talking about it.
He said, you were in my school, just here. Yesterday in Yale, a young girl said, I made a first class because of you, because you bought laptop. And that was the first laptop I used. Somewhere I read it, even in social media. So, but here today, somebody said, you were in my school. I visited all the secondary schools, as governor at least twice. I went to a particular secondary school, and their roof had a problem, and they had a bill to do it. So I said to them, by the time you come back from Christmas, it's done. In January, I went back there. I went to the same local government, and when it was question time, because I always ask the people, I do what I call participatory democracy. I want to listen to the people, just like I said. I want to learn. A young JS1, very tiny in front like this, raised a hand. So I said, let's start with him. I've greeted his principal and everybody when I was coming in. They told me things are okay. This young girl raised her hand. And I said, let's start with you. He said, Governor, why do you make promise you don't keep? The whole hall went dead. Everybody, people started shouting. She started crying. So I said, no, wait. There's a promise I didn't keep. And this person knows. And he described it. And I said to the people, you can see what I'm saying. Principal, you told me everything is okay. You told me, I asked you, how school? Say, oh, we're doing well. But this is remembered, there was a promise I didn't keep. The teachers were actually running to come and carry her out of the place. And I told the commissioner for education, I will not live here if I don't give this girl this check. How we do it, I don't want to know. So we went to a local bank, raised the draft, because they've given us a bill. Then we can go back and do the documentation. But I have to apologize to this young girl, because we need to build public trust. I took the same check and gave to the girl. Guess what happened? The principal and everybody came and carried the girl, ran and was celebrating. But they couldn't tell me. So it's not civil disobedience. We need to tell people they are wrong. Nobody knows everything unless you're an idiot. I don't know everything. You must listen to people. You must. All my life is about listening to people. I live in Lagos. My gate man tells me everything that happens in that street. Once I come back and say, "Oga Elijah, what happened today?" He knows every story. The ones I don't know. So if you listen to people, it's great. It's important. So it's not civil disobedience. Do it as often as you can. And those who are stopping it don't want to learn. They don't want to govern. If you must lead, people must say no to you. And everybody cannot like you. If everybody here is happy with me, there's a problem. There must be people who will say, listen, what is this man? This foolish man shouldn't exist. Because it's a life. So you must allow them. I thought it's the last one.
Hi, Mr. Obi, over here. Over here. Hi.
Okay.
Hi. My name is Ashley Iwu. I'm very thankful that you're here. As you know, Africans, we're so brilliant, and we continue to break borders in every organization that we join. And I think it's honestly because of the ethics that we have when we are born, and in our families and in our schools. Our schools tend to teach it, but our systems don't really reinforce it. And it brings manipulation on a micro and a macro level. But so when we tend to Japa, we other countries have like a somewhat more of a straightforward system where we can rise. So since you were a governor and you were hoping to be president, I just wanted to ask and pick your brain around, how do you think we can create a ripple effect in Nigeria and other countries to promote systems where we can rise in a macro and a micro level? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I discussed that issue a little bit. Can you hear me? Is it still working? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I was discussing this with some of your colleagues just now. That it's time, those of you who are exposed and have learned, needs to come and ask us to go. You can't give what you don't have. When you're talking about building institutions and doing everything, I was discussing with him about power. There's nothing in power. If I use Nigeria, for example, it's not a rocket science. Those institutions you're seeing in the Western world or in the developed world, there's nothing that is there. It is a question of people, like I said, cumulative leadership of failure over the years that refuse to rise up to their responsibility and put in place all those institutions. And when people say about African or Nigerian diaspora, oh, it's a brain drain, I always tell them it's a brain gain. They did it in Asia. I followed the history of what happened in most Asian countries. It is people from here. In the 90s, it will shock you, 80s and 90s, most of the people I met in business school were from India, China, this, that. In fact, I was shocked that at the time, I don't know what has happened here. Dean of school in Kellogg, India. Dean of school in Oxford, India. Agents took over all of places. They were from here. So the place is waiting for you to come and help to build those institutions. No other person can do it. When I became governor, there's certain things that were happening that I asked, why are we doing it? Nobody could explain to me. It's just because, like I said, we had a governor in Anambra State, but we have a lodge in Lagos and Abuja. I said, why do we have to have a lodge in Abuja? The governor doesn't live there. They said, well, everybody have it. So most questions are asked, most things that I wanted to do, and people said it. I was just showing Amara said what my head of service wrote, stinginess as a development strategy. So they said, oh, it was stingy because you question, why do we have to have a street light when there's no light in secondary school? Why are we going to have street light? What are we using to do? They say, oh, the governor has to build a light from where you pass at night. Where are we going to have guest houses all over the place? There's so many things you question. Why are we going to have office of first lady? My wife didn't contest the election. 2 of us live in a house. So why do you have to have office with her? Why is he having advisors? What are they advising her? She's married to me. We are a very happy family. We're very happy. So there's no other advice you need. It's me and her. So these are things you question. And all those things helped us. Why are we not doing well in education? You ask simple question. What is the plan? What is our development strategy? What are we, most people don't even know. We didn't have Ministry of Planning when I started. I said we have to have Ministry of Planning. What is our vision? What is our mission? Like he asked me. What are we trying to? What are you talking about? What is it all about development? That's where you start. It's the issue of health, education, and pulling people out of poverty. So those institutions and everything is what is needed. And it can be done. And that's what you're seeing here. So it's easy for you to fit because there's already an established system. And that is not a song. It is just we have not worked on it.
I think we have time for one last question. So you can choose very wisely, but it's just one question.
Go on, it won't be the last one.
Yeah, last question.
It won't be the last question.
Who is someone in the back? Yep. He's been very, very keen. They have a microphone already.
Oh, okay.
I have a mic, okay.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. My name is Chris Ikeliani. I'm an indigene of Anambra State. And he's not listening yet, so.
Okay, go on.
Okay. Yeah, my question to you is around what you talked about. I think many people here want to go back and help the country in some form or shape. But my question is a simple one, and I don't know if the answer is simple as well, but what do you think from your experience is the best, vertical or sector to go back to work in order to build the country? Is it the private or is it the public sector? And I know both of them have various impediments or whatever, but what do you think, from your experience right now would have the most impact?
Well, I'll say a combination of both. Why do I say a combination of both? Both are lacking. So you won't say this is good, and let's go into this. The public space needs you to help to build the institution that will make it work. If you look at this, today we have a situation where we have insecurity. You have insecurity where non-state actors have taken over the state. The reason is that the state is not doing what it's supposed to do. There's no place where criminals can be better than the state. Right now we have a situation where we have oil theft. As you know, no individual can steal oil. It's people in government stealing oil. Because none of you here can steal oil. You can't put oil in your pocket. It requires a ship to come into your water, and your Navy have to approve it. So all this, it is people like you who have now had the exposure that can come and say, we can't continue on this path. We cannot continue on this. The right things that has been done, like he asked the question, if we said, what is measure of development? Everybody knows that the first fundamental measure of development is health. So what are we doing in the primary health care space, which is basic? The next is education. What are we doing in education? Because you need to invest in these critical areas. And until we have people like you asking that question in the public space, which is the physical side, and then, of course, you can talk about the business side. But what I ever tell people about Africa is that Africa, using Nigeria as well, remains a continent of opportunity. Huge opportunity. Because if we talk about natural resources, no other continent in the world today have African natural resources. If you talk about vast or cultivated land, there's no other continent would have about 65% of its land uncultivated. I talked about a young friend of mine from Yale. Is he here?
He's over there.
Thank you. I met this young man in 2018. I was in Yale and I met him. He's never been to Nigeria before. Never had anything to do. His parents are Nigerian. He's never been to Nigeria before. He doesn't know anything about Nigeria. And he said to me, I'm going back to Nigeria to do business. And I said, how can you go back to Nigeria? You don't know the place. You've never been there. He said, yes, there's a business he wants to go and do. And he left, came to Nigeria, went to a village where I wouldn't even go. He went there to do this business. He believes in. Just to tell you how it is. And of course, when he was going, he told me how good the business will be. And of course, I was just watching it. And then one day he told me, he phoned me and said he had a problem. ABCD is his problem and everything. You know, some people are trying to do this, do this. I was fascinated about this young man who from nowhere. So I had to call the authorities. You know, I called the authorities. I said, listen, this young man, nothing will happen to him, his equipment, everything. Of course, they gave him back. He got back all his things, continued to do. And one day, when he was going, he mentioned it to me, and he was excited that, oh, maybe if you want, you can invest. And of course, I've lost a lot of money. I've lost a lot of money, but not deliberately. So I saw this one, I was going to lose the... And suddenly he came to me and said, oh, this company is now worth $3 million. And I was like, what are you doing? I would have given this boy $10,000. And he was said, I said, what is happening here? You know, I'm being the people who did Zoom years back in I think it was 2014, in one of the schools, and they were talking about this thing. It didn't make any meaning to me until after COVID, and people started using this thing. And the price, I said, what? So I said, what is this boy doing? He said, $10 million. The next thing, I was in the newspaper, it's going to raise $5 million. I said, wait a minute. Maybe I have to follow this boy to this bush and know what he's doing there. But what am I trying to do? Is become a success. And I've had people who do the same thing. In several places, young people who started something when I was in government and said to me, this and everything. And that's why I'm saying there's so much hope and energy for that continent. All you need is to create enabling environment that will allow you to unleash that talent, energy, everything. It's a huge opportunity. So it's something that I won't say to you this or that. Today, all for me, like I keep saying, if I had the opportunity, focus on security, law and order. You need that intangible assets of ensuring security, law and order, create a physical and monitoring environment that support SMEs. Leave the rest for the young people to do. Because you have the talent to do what your counterparts all over the world is doing. And Africa will work. It's just to stop people from stealing public wealth. Use it to do the right things. Give it to those who will multiply it. Any country or continent where its politics is more profitable than enterprise, it's finished. You can't. You know? So you must stop that, because what it is that corruption is there. Corruption kills entrepreneurship. Nobody's thinking, it kills professionalism. It kills hard work. So you have a professor in this university probably earns more money than governor of the state, if he knows what he's doing. I saw it in Kellogg and Harvard. Or they earn at least more money than most of your state legislators. In Nigeria, it's not the same thing. You pay a professor 400,000 naira. That is about $30,000. And if he decides to keep his money without eating, every year is about 5 million naira. So he needs about 32 years to earn enough to buy a car you bought for a national legislator. It cannot continue. You must dismantle that criminality and push it to those who are productive. People who are productive. Our country has all the potential to be a great country, but you must move it from its present corruption and consumption to production. And it has the machinery, the talent, the energy, the market, everything. And once you do that, your rate of exchange, everything will change very easily. I've seen it before, and it can work. It's just that it requires a leader that understands the environment, understands what is to be done, and go around to do it effectively.
Thank you so much.
So I think they said no more questions.
Yeah, no, that was a fantastic note to end it on. Thank you so much.